Delayed gratification is one of those ideas that sounds simple enough to be obvious, yet powerful enough to be life-altering, which is why so few people actually practice it consistently. At its core, delayed gratification is not about denying pleasure, but about choosing when pleasure serves you rather than controls you. In wealth psychology, this single ability often separates those who merely earn money from those who quietly accumulate it over decades. The most revealing insight from the best books on this topic is not that discipline creates wealth, but that impatience silently destroys it long before any financial mistake becomes visible. One of the earliest psychological demonstrations of this idea came from the famous Stanford marshmallow experiment, often cited in books like Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Children were given a simple choice: eat one marshmallow now or wait and receive 2 later. Years later, researchers found strong correlations between the ability to wait and long-term outcomes in health, relationships, and finances. Kahneman uses this experiment to illustrate the tension between what he calls System 1 and System 2, thinking the fast, emotional, impulse-driven mind versus the slow, deliberate, future-oriented one. Wealth, he argues indirectly, is not built by intelligence alone, but by the repeated victory of the slower system over the faster one in moments that seem trivial at the time. This insight is echoed powerfully in The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, a book that reframes wealth as a function of behavior rather than knowledge. Housel points out that doing well with money has little to do with spreadsheets and everything to do with temperament. Delayed gratification in his framework is the ability to let time do the heavy lifting. Compounding only works for those who are willing to appear boring, slow, and even foolish in the short term. The greatest fortunes, he notes, are often built not by extraordinary decisions, but by avoiding catastrophic ones: panic-selling lifestyle inflation, and the constant urge to turn every surplus into immediate consumption. A deeper philosophical layer emerges in Your Money or Your Life by Vicki Robin and Joe Dominguez. Here, delayed gratification is no longer framed as a tactic, but as an ethical choice about how life energy is spent. Every dollar saved rather than consumed represents hours of life reclaimed in the future. The book challenges readers to see spending as a trade-off between present pleasure and future freedom. In this light, delayed gratification stops feeling like sacrifice and starts feeling like self-respect. You are not depriving yourself. You are protecting a future version of yourself who will depend entirely on the decisions you are making now. Neuroscience-based work such as Atomic Habits by James Clear further clarify why delayed gratification is so difficult to maintain. Clear explains that the human brain is wired to prioritize immediate rewards because for most of evolutionary history, survival depended on it. Modern wealth building, however, requires overriding ancient instincts in an environment engineered for instant satisfaction. Clear's contribution is showing that willpower alone is unreliable. Systems, environments, and habits must be designed so that the future-oriented choice becomes the default rather than the exception. Wealthy individuals often appear disciplined, not because they are stronger, but because they have structured their lives to reduce temptation. Another crucial perspective comes from The Millionaire Next Door. Stanley and Danko's research revealed that most self-made millionaires practice delayed gratification so thoroughly that it becomes invisible. They drive used cars, live below their means, and resist status consumption, not because they dislike pleasure, but because they understand its long-term cost. Their wealth is not accidental. It is the cumulative result of thousands of small decisions, where later was chosen over now. This book dismantles the illusion that wealth looks flashy while it is being built. In reality, it often looks like restraint. Across these books, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Delayed gratification is not a single heroic act. It is a lifestyle of micro-decisions, each one insignificant on its own, yet transformative in aggregate. Saying no to unnecessary debt, reinvesting returns instead of upgrading lifestyles, allowing investments to compound uninterrupted. None of these actions feel dramatic, but together they create an asymmetry where time begins to work for you instead of against you. What makes this lesson especially uncomfortable is that the cost of impatience is rarely immediate. The bill arrives years later, disguised as stress dependence or lost options. Conversely, the reward for patience is also delayed, often appearing so gradually that people forget what created it. This asymmetry explains why so many intelligent, hardworking individuals struggle financially, while others with average incomes quietly achieve independence. The difference is not desire, but the ability to wait. As these books collectively suggest, delayed gratification is not about becoming joyless or rigid. It is about aligning short-term actions with long-term values. When values are unclear, waiting feels painful. When values are clear, waiting feels purposeful. This is where wealth psychology departs from traditional financial advice. The real challenge is not calculating returns, but managing emotion identity and ego in a culture that rewards immediacy and visibility. And once this realization settles, another question inevitably follows. If delayed gratification is so powerful, why do so few people sustain it over an entire lifetime? And what differentiates those who internalize it deeply from those who understand it intellectually, but still fail to live by it? Because the answer lies not in discipline alone, but in how people define success, happiness, and enough, which is where the story must continue from there. Because understanding delayed gratification at an intellectual level is relatively easy, while living it consistently over decades is what truly separates outcomes. The reason so many people fail to sustain it is not because they lack knowledge, but because they never fully redefine what success feels like. As long as success is measured by visible rewards, social approval, or short-term comfort, delayed gratification will always feel like loss. The individuals who master it do something fundamentally different. They train themselves to derive satisfaction from progress, rather than applause from stability, rather than display, and from future optionality, rather than present indulgence. Wealth psychology books repeatedly show that delayed gratification becomes durable only when it is tied to identity. When someone begins to see themselves as a long-term thinker, a builder, or a steward of future freedom, waiting no longer feels like deprivation. It feels like alignment. This is why habits and environment matter so deeply. People who succeed financially tend to reduce exposure to temptation, automate good decisions, and surround themselves with norms that reward patience. They are not constantly negotiating with themselves. They have removed many of the decisions that drain willpower, allowing consistency to emerge naturally. Another crucial insight is that delayed gratification is not about postponing happiness indefinitely. It is about choosing a higher quality form of happiness later rather than a lower quality one now. The pleasure of impulse spending fades quickly, but the peace of financial security compounds. Books like The Psychology of Money emphasize that the greatest luxury wealth can buy is control over time. That control is purchased slowly with many small acts of restraint that seem unrewarded in the moment, but quietly accumulate into independence. There is also a moral dimension that these books hint at, but rarely state directly. Delayed gratification is an act of responsibility toward one's future self. It acknowledges that the person you will become deserves consideration equal to the person you are today. When people fail financially, it is often because they repeatedly prioritize the present self at the expense of the future one. This creates an internal imbalance that eventually manifests as external stress. Those who practice delayed gratification consistently tend to experience less financial anxiety, not because they have more money, but because they trust their own decision-making process over time. As this mindset deepens, behavior changes in predictable ways. Spending becomes intentional rather than reactive. Investing becomes patient rather than frantic. Risk is approached thoughtfully rather than emotionally. Perhaps most importantly, comparison loses its power. When your goals are long-term and internal, the achievements of others no longer dictate your actions. This insulation from social pressure is one of the hidden benefits of delayed gratification, and it explains why those who master it often appear calm in situations that provoke panic in others. Ultimately, the lesson from wealth psychology is that delayed gratification is not a financial trick. It is a life philosophy. It governs how people approach learning, relationships, health, and work just as much as money. Those who cultivate it early gain an advantage that compounds across every domain of life. Those who adopt it later still benefit, but often with the quiet regret of realizing how much easier the path could have been had patience been practiced sooner. If there is a single takeaway from these books, it is this: wealth is not the reward for resisting temptation once, but for building a life where temptation loses its urgency. The power of delayed gratification lies not in denial, but in designing a life where the future is protected by default, and where today's choices quietly honor tomorrow's freedom. If this reflection resonated with you, pause for a moment and ask yourself where impatience has been quietly taxing your future. Leave a comment and share the insight that stood out to you most. And if you want to continue exploring the psychology behind money discipline and long-term success, consider subscribing and staying with this series. These ideas are not meant to impress, but to endure.